I'm going to be using the word desensitized over and over again in this sermon. And so first of all, I would like to give a definition of what that means. It simply means to make less sensitive, especially in medicine, to lessen or eliminate the sensitivity of an individual organ or tissue. And I don't know if you've ever thought about it very much from this perspective, but really this is a problem that we all have, of allowing ourselves to be desensitized in certain areas which have a direct bearing upon our relationship with God. Or perhaps I should say that it's not so much that we allow it to happen, but sometimes it is something that happens inadvertently in our lives without being fully aware of what is taking place. In other words, it comes about as a result of neglect. And certainly this is something that needs to be addressed in our lives. And so I'm going to be posing the question tonight, have we been desensitized? Now when I talk about being desensitized or being less sensitive in regard to those things that have to do with our service to God, let me be very plain what I'm talking about. I am talking about the heart and really the condition of our heart. I'm talking about our state of mind, and I'm talking about the conscience and all that that entails. Do we tonight have a heart that is alert to and that is in tune with the things of God? Do we? Do we have that readiness of mind that the Bible talks about? And do we have a sensitive conscience that keeps us on the straight and narrow pathway? And of course, obviously, all of those things are necessary in order to be the kind of people that God would have us to be. Or could it be that at least to some extent, in some area of our life, we have been desensitized? And by that I mean that our heart has been affected to where it isn't quite as prepared as it ought to be. Our minds have become dulled somewhat to where it isn't alert and focused as it ought to be. And yes, our conscience has lost some of its sensitivity to where we don't find ourselves offended by sin as we ought to be and maybe as we once were. Have we been desensitized? Well, my answer that I'm going to give to this question tonight, and it may shock you, it may alarm you to some extent, and really I hope that it does, but I'm going to go out on a limb tonight by saying that most of us, and indeed probably all of us, to some extent, have been in certain areas of our life. And let me say that if you don't agree with that statement, I'm going to ask you tonight to just simply bear with me. Before you make a final judgment, just simply hear me out, and then of course you can reach your own conclusion. Now let me say that in the Bible we have two different kinds of hearts that are described for us, or perhaps I should say two different conditions pertaining to the heart. And of course obviously they are extremely opposite to each other. On one hand we read of those who are pure in heart in Matthew 5 and verse 8. And incidentally, that's the theme of this meeting. We also read of that honest and good heart that Jesus talked about in Luke 8 and verse 15. And Paul wrote of a good conscience in 1 Timothy 1 and verse 5. But then on the other hand, we know that the Bible also talks about an evil heart in Hebrews 3 and verse 12. We read of a hard and impenitent heart in Romans 2 and verse 5, and in 1 Timothy 4 and verse 2, Paul talks about a conscience that is seared with a hot iron. And it just simply means that the conscience, as a result, is totally dead, as if it had been hardened by a searing iron. Now notice this implies that at one time they had a heart and a conscience that was good and sensitive, but through some kind of process, the heart became hardened and finally was seared over. And so eventually they became like those described in Ephesians 4 and verse 19. And I want you to notice the language that Paul uses. Paul says of some that they are past feeling. Think about that. feeling. You know what that means? That means exactly what it sounds like it means. It means that they have lost all feeling toward God and righteousness. They were no longer sensitive to what was right or wrong, and as a result, they have no sense of shame. But the point I want you to see is, at one time, they did. To say that they are now past feeling is to say that they have lost what they once possessed. The question is tonight, how did they lose it? What led to the hardening of their heart to where they finally felt nothing and they had no pangs of conscience? Well, the Bible tells us in Hebrews 3 and verse 13 that we can be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. And what I want us to understand is that this involves a process. Obviously, this is not something that happens overnight. A person doesn't go overnight from a good heart and a good conscience to an evil heart and a hard conscience or no conscience at all. But there is a process that we go through. And sometimes, and this is the danger, brethren, sometimes we don't even realize what is happening unto us. So I want to pose this question tonight. Have we been desensitized? And really I want to talk about some of the things involved in this process. And what I want to emphasize is this, and I think we need to understand this, that we can be desensitized through repetition and overexposure. And really that's what we face in this ungodly world in which we live. Surely I don't have to tell you tonight that we live in a wicked world where sin abounds on every hand. And you know what? I fear sometimes that we underestimate the influence that the world is exercising over us. And you know what? If you don't agree with the statement that I've just made, if you don't agree that we're living in a wicked world and even a wicked society, then I'm afraid tonight that you have already proved the point that I'm trying to make. You see, all of us are constantly being bombarded with propaganda from the secular humanists and those who would suggest that the Bible is outdated and morality is something that each person must determine for themselves. I think we can say that loose thinking, loose living, and loose morals has become the norm of the day. And you know what? If we think that merely because we are members of the church that we have escaped without being influenced by such wicked philosophies, I'm afraid tonight that we are deceiving ourselves. So let me ask you this. Have we been desensitized in regard to morality? Let me give you some things to think about tonight, and you make the application to your own life. You know what? In just the past 60 years, and basically that's my lifespan, because I am now 63 years of age. And in the past 60 years, we have seen some profound changes take place in our society toward morals and really what was once simply considered as decent behavior. Did you know, for example, that when the movie Gone with the Wind came out in 1939, that it ended with a curse word in it? And incidentally, we're talking about one curse word. It ended with one curse word being said when Red Butler told Scarlett O'Hara that he just simply did not care anymore. Did you know that this in 1939 was a real shock? When people went to see that movie and they heard that one curse word, I'm telling you, they were shocked. I'm telling you, they almost swallowed their tongues. And my understanding is they almost wrote the word out. They almost did not include it in the script because they did not think in 1939 that it would be accepted by decent people. And you know what? When you stop to think about it, how things have certainly changed. You know, if you were to watch a program today, here's the question that I'm asking you. If today you were watching a program and you were to hear that word, I wonder, would it shock you? Would it? Would you be offended by that word? so offended that you would absolutely turn the television off and walk away? You know what the truth is? The truth is we can hear a lot worse than that almost every night on regular television, certainly not to mention cable TV. In fact, you can even hear worse than that on the radio today. And you know what I think? I think it doesn't bother us like it once did. I don't think we're offended by that kind of language like we once were. You see, the point is we have been desensitized. Let me give you another example to think about. When Elvis Presley appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1957, this would have been his third appearance. Did you know that they would only show him from the waist up? On television at that time, they would not show him from the waist down. The reason is because the way that he moved and gyrated when he sang was considered vulgar and offensive to a lot of folks. And you know, again, I have to say, when you think about it, that seems almost innocent now, doesn't it? That seems innocent compared to what they show on television nowadays. In fact, the truth is you can see practically anything on television today. You can see partial nudity. On cable television, you can see a complete nudity. There is immorality depicted right before your very eyes. The truth is there is not much left to the imagination anymore. So think about it. When Elvis first appeared on TV, people were shocked by what they didn't show. They were shocked by what they did not see. My question is tonight, is there anything, literally, is there anything today that we can hear or anything that we can see that would not shock us? You know what the truth is? The truth is, to some extent, we have been desensitized. You know what? I don't think, now you think about this, I don't think murder even shocks us like it once did. You know, there was a time when a murder took place in a community or in a town or in a city. That was big news. In fact, they might put out a special edition, and the newsboy would be out there on the street corner, and he would say, "Extra, extra, read all about it. A murder has taken place." But I don't think it shocks us anymore. Maybe today we get our newspaper, and on the front page it tells about some murder that's taking place where we live, and we may not even read it. We skip right over it and go to the sports page or go to the comic section, because really that's not too shocking anymore. In fact, today, and it seems like this takes place almost weekly anymore, we not only hear reports about murders, but even mass murders. We read about some deranged individual who goes into a church even, or a place of business with an automatic weapon and shoots and kills as many people as he possibly can, and then perhaps he even turns the weapon on himself and takes his own life. Have we been desensitized? Let me ask you this tonight. Have we been desensitized in regard to morality? Surely while we all agree that fornication and adultery is a sin, let me ask you this. How many of us are shocked today if we hear there's a couple that is living together outside of the bonds of matrimony? Would that shock you? If somebody said, here's some people over here that are living together and they're not even pretending to be married. What if we hear about a woman who is expecting out of wedlock, and maybe they have to get married, as we say, as a result? You know what? I don't think that shocks us today like it once did. It has become too commonplace, and it really does not carry the shame and the stigma with it that it once did. And then let me say this, and this is what I really want to touch on before I close tonight, and I want to do so especially for the younger folks in this audience. What about the homosexual agenda that has become so prevalent in our society? You know, I said that I'm 63 years old. You know what? I can remember a time when you didn't talk about homosexuality. Not in public, you didn't. In fact, everybody practically understood that that was a sin. It was in the closet, back then, as we say, because it was a shameful thing. And yet, as we know, in a relative short period of time, it has gained ground in our society. And you know how they have brought this about? And you know what? You've got to give them credit. They had a brilliant strategy that they carried out brilliantly in a wicked way. But really their strategy was this. They wanted to make homosexuality seem commonplace and something that is widespread. In fact, if you listen to the advocates, to the proponents of this movement, they want you to believe that the number of people that have given themselves to this lifestyle is something like 23%, or maybe even more, of Americans. I want to tell you tonight, that's a lie. That's a lie. Did you know that really the statistics, and I looked it up this morning on the internet, that it is believed that it is more like 3.8%. Think about that. Less than 4% actually say that they have given themselves to this kind of a lifestyle. But you see, their agenda, and really, as I said, their strategy was to try to make it appear commonplace, make it appear to be a normal way of life. And so what happened? You would have television shows, you would have sitcoms, and on most of them you would have at least one character who was homosexual. And of course, obviously, they were nice people and they were funny individuals. And what did that do? That opened up the door. People began to think, well, maybe it's not such a terrible thing after all. And since it is such a widespread thing, it seems that people have had an attitude of acceptance in regard to this kind of moral perversion. And let me say tonight, that's what it is. It is moral perversion that is contrary to the will of God. And so what happened? Well, what happened this year on June the 26th, 2015, and I tell you what, in my mind, this will always be a day of infamy. The Supreme Court made so-called same-sex marriages legal in all 50 states. In all 50 states, this is now the law of the land. And here's what I want to say, and Sam, if I'm getting close to the time, let me know, and we'll fulfill your desire tonight. But I want to say this. You know what? Here, I want you young people to understand this. This was not a close decision. Did you know that? This was a close decision. It was not a unanimous decision. In fact, there were 5 justices that voted for it. There was 4 that voted against it, and that even included the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts Jr. He actually voted against it. And I want to read to you what John Roberts said in his dissent, because I think this really makes the point I want to make. Listen to what he said. John Roberts, who is the Chief Justice right now on the Supreme Court. Here's what he said. He said, celebrate the achievement of a desired goal. Listen now, but do not celebrate the Constitution. He said it had nothing to do with the Constitution. And he went on to write that the court invalidates the marriage laws of more than half the states and orders the transformation of a social institution that has formed the basis of human society for millennia. And then you know what he said? He said, who in the world do we think we are? That's a good question. Who in the world do we think that we are? I'll tell you who they thought they were. They thought in authority they were equal to God Almighty Himself. And I want you to bear in mind tonight, they are the Supreme Court of the United States, but they are not the supreme being. Remember that. Now make no mistake about it. The Supreme Court is an august body. It is the highest court in our land. And I'm sure that Brother Shahay is going to touch on this in a moment. And that is, the Bible teaches that we are to respect civil authorities and the institutions that govern over us. But you know what? They overstepped their bounds. Because what they sought to do was to redefine marriage as given by God. And you know what? God is the author of marriage. God is the author of the family, and not mankind, not some human being. And therefore marriage is what God says that it is and always will be. And that's why I said a few moments ago, same-sex marriage is so called. And listen, when we use that language, we need to let people know that's accommodated language, because really there is no such thing as a same-sex marriage. That's an oxymoron. That's a contradiction of terms. It's not biblical, certainly. And I'll tell you something else. It goes against the natural order of things as God created this world. Really, that's what Paul said in condemning homosexuality in Romans 1. Paul said that it is against nature. Man does not have the right to redefine marriage. What is marriage? Well, Jesus said, have you not read that in the beginning? Now listen. In the beginning, he made them male and female. Male and female. And he said, for this reason shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. And then he said, what God had joined together, let not man put asunder. That's what composes marriage. It has to do with a man and with a woman who take each other as their spouse and are committed to each other. As we said, God is the author of marriage. Listen, have we been desensitized in regard even to homosexuality? You know, I was at the mall not that long ago, and I saw two young ladies walking down through the mall holding hands together. It was obvious what was taking place. I'll have to admit to you tonight, I wasn't necessarily shocked by what I saw. I can't even say that I was necessarily shocked that the Supreme Court handed down that decision. It kind of surprised me it came so soon. I was hoping they'd put it off a little longer. But I think most of us could see that's where our society was headed. So what do we have to do? What we need to do, and this is my last point tonight, what we need to do as parents and grandparents and as the church is we need to make sure that our children and our grandchildren and our younger ones that are coming along understand what the Bible teaches concerning this important topic. Because you know what's going to happen? If time goes on long enough, we're going to have a generation that's going to come along and they're going to think this is the way it's always been. Well, it isn't the way that it's always been. It wasn't that way when I was growing up and when many of you in this audience were growing up. And listen, the America that our grandchildren are growing up in tonight is not the America that we grew up in. And that's sad. It's sad to see the direction that our society is headed in. And we need to make sure that we don't allow these things to desensitize us to where we lose sensitivity in regard to what God's Word teaches. The only way we can make sure that doesn't happen is keep reading the Bible, keep studying it, keep making it a part of our hearts and a part of our lives. As David said in the long ago, "My word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin."